All right. Welcome in to the first ever episode of the Note News podcast. Super exciting. We're really excited to get this started for everyone. On today's episode, we're going to talk about what went wrong and what went right for the 2023-24 St. Louis Blues. And then we're going to talk about some Stanley Cup playoffs. We're going to break down some news and notes from recently. All that and more on today's episode of Note News. Alec, how we doing? You excited?
Absolutely. I'm super excited to hop into what we've got today. A little bit of a frustrating season, and we'll see how our Blues end up looking, but excited to get talking about it. And there's a lot of good to be had. So,
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. I figured since this is the first ever episode, we should start out with some introductions, tell people who we are. I can go first so you have some time to think. But my name is John Poston. I'm going to be one of your hosts here on the Note News Pod. I'm a lifelong fan of St. Louis sports. So obviously, Cardinals, now City SC, the Battlehawks, and of course, the St. Louis Blues. And similar to Alec, as you'll hear, I'm sure I've got some experience in broadcasting. And so I'm just really excited to keep bringing some sports content people's way and um, keep talking about sports. What about you, Alec?
yep, same for me. I'm raised St. Louis pretty much my whole life. Been a sports fan ever since. I remember I always followed the Blues and Cardinals. I remember the moment I really truly fell in love with hockey, though, was at that Winter Olympics in Russia. TJ Oshie in
Mm-hmm.
overtime in the
Yeah.
shootout. Just what a wonderful moment. And yeah, I'm getting into the broadcasting world myself too. So love talking sports. Love doing this kind of work. So looking forward to it.
Awesome. Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, let's just jump in, Alec. What do you say?
Absolutely, let's do it.
All right. So for the 2023-24 season, the St. Louis Blues finished with 92 points and a 43-33-6 record. That's good enough for fifth in the Central Division, ninth in the Western Conference, and 16th overall. Alec, can you give me some general ideas? Sort of how would you sum up the Blues season? What's your take on that?
I think overall, if we're being honest with ourselves, this was probably the 55th percentile outcome of the range of outcomes, because it could have gone a whole lot worse, and had another pretty much disaster like we had last season. Obviously, I think a lot of us were hoping for a lot better. There's a lot of promise there.
Mm-hmm.
And right under the playoff line, and once you get into the playoffs, give me Bennington and a chance any day. But really, I think, being honest, I think it's about an expected ish outcome that I'm not upset with,
Mm-hmm.
but it is somewhat frustrating.
Yeah, frustrating for sure. Anytime your team doesn't make the playoffs, it's easy to think of it as a failure or to be disappointed in some way. And obviously, that would have been a mark of success for the season. But I think in my eyes, and I've mentioned this to you, Alec, and I think I talked about it when I went on the Deal on the Cards podcast. I think the season overall, when you take a step back and look at it as a whole, I think it's sort of a net positive. Like you said, 50 to 55. I would give the edge to, 55, maybe even 60, because, looking at how the team performed last season, the expectations coming into the year, I think that the fact that they were in it at the end, I think is a net benefit. Like I said, I think um, the way that the season went, the sort of the flow of the season, they started off poorly and sort of picked it up and made it close at the end. I would take that any day over a team that was in it at the beginning and then the wheels, fell off down
Yeah,
the stretch.
yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah, for sure. So, disappointing for them to come just short of the playoffs, but I think overall I feel positive about the Blues, and it might be a little bit before we see them really return to contention. But I think as a whole, the season was a positive. All right, I think we
Definitely.
should start to really break some of this down, and talk about what went wrong for the Blues this year. We can sort of take turns running through this, but one thing, and it's a big thing, is that they struggled to score enough goals this year. They only scored 239 goals, which is 24th in the league overall, and that's just not enough. That's an average of 2.91 goals a game. Alec, what do you think about the Blues' ability to score goals this season?
Yeah, and I think not just with the goal scoring, I think it really felt the worst in moments that it mattered.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, it really, to me, I think was a question of lack of finishing. And I think we had seen in the past couple seasons a departure of really key players that, whether we knew it at the time or not, were really crucial to this team's goal scoring abilities. I'm thinking
Yeah.
about guys like Tarasenko, David
Hmm.
Perron as that sniper on his side.
Yeah.
Um, that really were able to get those one timers or just finish a nice pass that we just couldn't get those chances home. And guys like Neighbors are showing promise.
Hmm.
And we're starting towards the end of the year. We started to get some production from the blue line. I think that's another
Right.
thing too. Is our so-called offensive defensemen
Hmm.
don't really provide either of those things. Um, and the young defensemen, it's hard to expect much of anything, especially if they weren't like a high draft pick. So yeah,
Sure.
it takes finishing. I think the setup is all there, but it's going to take some either coaching or talent to work that in.
Yeah, for sure. And one thing I'll say, and you might, people might notice we'll do this with some of the negatives, just sort of a positive spin on it, is that, even though the offense of the whole team struggled, we still had five players with 26 or more goals. I think those are Robert Thomas, Jake Neighbors, Jordan Kyrou, Buchnevich, and I believe Brandon Saad is the
Yep,
fifth.
he had
Um,
26.
yeah, so I mean, some of that higher end scoring talent. There's just not the depth there to pick up the team when those players aren't on the ice. So I mean, hopefully that means it'll be a more easily addressable thing for them this off season and moving forward. But um, I would say, I mean, those five did pretty well.
And if you want to extend that list to 20 goals, which I think is a good benchmark for
Hmm.
an okay finisher, you can add Shen to that list too. He had 20.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think it really comes down to, honestly, like down the stretch, we were just getting no production from the third and fourth lines. And like, yeah, they're third and fourth liners for a reason. But I mean, it's like they wouldn't even run into one, in a
Yeah,
throwaway game against the Buffalo Sabres or whatever.
yeah,
It's stuff like that
yeah,
that really is where some of these inconsistencies can come up. However, I think our talent coming up is really promising. We saw a lot of really promising development. So I really like where we're headed in that direction. And I don't see this as a problem that can't be fixed by even next season.
yeah. I totally agree there. Um, what's something else? Let's talk about the defense, Alec. I mean, this was arguably the biggest issue for the Blues this year. While they only scored, 239 goals, I believe I said, um, they allowed 248. So they had that negative goal differential, and they gave up 2,636 shots, and that's 32.14 per game. That's the eighth most in the league. I mean, that's just a sign of the poor defense. And um, the goalie tandem was elite, as we'll talk about later once we shift to the positives. But no matter how good your goaltending is, the defense has to be able to back them up. So, what did you see from the Blues defense this year? What do you want to talk about there?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for defense for me is it feels more of a roster construction issue than anything else. I think with what we have, it's not good. I think actually it was better this year than I've seen in like the past couple years. That might just be my opinion. But like last year, it was unplayably bad. This year,
Mm,
you could say it's similar, but I think there was more to go off of there. Colton Pareko kind of bouncing back to form, actually led the league in block shots.
yep.
And getting some efforts from our young guys like Kessel,
Hmm.
getting to see him progress along. He's still got a ways to go, but there's something there. I'm actually kind of a fan of Nick Leddy's game. That might be a hot take, depending on the Blues fan you ask. But
Yep.
I think for what he is and on a cheap contract, I think he's actually playing good hockey, and he skates really well,
Hmm.
which can really help either on special teams or just when you need a defenseman to make an NHL play and get something done. But it did kind of come down to outside of those two top pairing guys. I mean, we were throwing anyone off, like arguably unplayable. I guess we can get into it now, but Torrey Krug and Justin Falk don't really look like NHL players, if you ask me.
Sure.
Falk had some moments. I'm less upset with his game, but his contract's still a lot higher than it should be, I think.
Hmm.
And I mean, Torrey Krug, yeah. So that's what I'm saying. It's more of a roster construction issue because
Hmm.
I think with what we have, we're trying. The other thing too is the young guys. We haven't had a really star defensive prospect in quite some time.
Yeah.
Hopefully that'll change with the draft coming up, but that does mean that we're going to require some of these older guys to carry their weight. And our second and third pairings were definitely not doing that.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I'd agree with what you said. There's a couple highlights, individual players like you were saying, Colton Parayko, Nick Leddy. We could argue um, that they were good players this year, but as a unit, as a whole, the defense just has to be better, no matter how good your goalies are. Like I was saying,
Yeah.
and that's just not going to work. The old adage is defense wins championships, and no defense, no championship, and we saw that this year for sure. Um,
Mhm.
another unit of the team, or other units of the team rather, that I think we should talk about are the special teams units. The penalty kill and the power play were arguably atrocious this year. You could say definitely at times it was atrocious, but this was a big issue for the Blues. The penalty kill had the 13th worst percentage in the league at 78.6. And they only converted 18% of their power play opportunities. And that's bottom 10 in the league. That's bottom 3 in the Western Conference. So, I mean, when you're up against the wall and the other team has the man advantage, you just have to be able to stop it at a higher clip. And then likewise, when you have that advantage, you've got to be able to take advantage of the man advantage there. What do you want to talk about as far as the special teams units go?
Yeah, I mean, I think anytime you have special teams that are under 80%, you would expect that those are lottery teams, which I guess technically we were, but
Yeah.
that's not what you want, especially with where the Blues are as a franchise right now. Um, I think this could have something to do with when we saw the departure of Jim Montgomery to Boston. Obviously, goes on to win the coaching trophy that year.
Hmm.
He as an offensive assistant to Craig Berube, I think he played a much larger role in special teams than I think most fans recognized, and got a better job offer. So nothing on him for leaving, but that left the Blues scrambling more than they thought they were, which I think also maybe was helping some of Berube's coaching game. But we'll get into that later.
Hmm.
So yeah, I mean it wasn't always so much lack of effort. I think on the penalty kill, it goes back to that lack of finishing. I mean, how many times can Blues fans say, like, oh, they just made one too many passes, or oh, like, you just had to take a shot there? Like, at some point, it's better to get chances than to have Robert Thomas do everything he can, which he can do everything, but that doesn't mean that you should be relying on it.
Yeah.
Um, and on the penalty kill side of things, I think it's a skating thing. I think it's a roster construction thing, and I think it's a coaching thing. I think they all play into it. I'm not sure there is an easy solution, as in like a one thing, do this one thing and you can fix it. But I'm gonna rephrase what I just said. Actually, I do think it is an easy solution. I just think it takes a little bit more from um, everything that goes into it. But I see no reason that can't turn around quickly.
Yeah, and I mean, you sort of started to see that in the middle of the season. There were adjustments that were made with the coaching change, and we'll get into that pretty soon here. But definitely something that's fixable. And you look at people that are on those units, like Robert Thomas and Buchnevich. on paper, it looks like it should perform better. I mean, wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, yes, it does. And that's some of the exasperation of honestly St. Louis sports in general is how many times are we going to hear on paper?
On
Um,
paper, yeah,
but I some of it I think maybe it's a night to night chemistry thing. Maybe it's a let the lines develop. And but maybe it's just these guys' skill sets aren't what we thought they were. They aren't the all around players that we had previously assumed when they had such great help. Like when Pavel Buchnevich was able to play on the second line. I mean, that is just an incredible second winger. But
yeah,
that Blues team isn't this Blues team anymore. And so
hmm
he's asked to do a much bigger role. And it's more so expecting. I think we may have or our franchise may have expected things to just work out, to just plug and play, and
yeah,
it takes a little bit more nuance than that. Again, I think these are very fixable things. It just takes a genuine effort from the coaching and front office staff to do so.
yeah. That's a great point, 100%. So we talked about it a little bit already. You talked about Krug and Falk. I know that one thing you wanted to talk about was what you called the old guys not performing. Do you wanna tell me what you mean by that and start to break some of that down?
Yeah, I think this is some of. I think this is honestly the biggest roster construction part of what the Blues are struggling with right now. So what I'm talking about is a lot of really large, mostly non-movable, no trade clause contracts
Hmm.
for guys like Krug and Falk. Um, as much as I hate to say it, I think Braden Shen could have had a better season. Did score 20 goals, which we do
Hmm.
need, but maybe this was just a night to night thing for me. It felt like it came in times when it wasn't always necessary. There were a couple very large exceptions to that, but also his defensive game really fell off. He ended
Yeah,
up as a certainly negative player, and it was a negative 22 on the year. A lot of penalty minutes too. You want your captain to back up your guys, but also you want your captain on the ice. So
yeah,
it was more so. I feel like with Shen, kind of what I touched on already is he was a bit. He's getting a little older. And don't get me wrong, I absolutely love Braden Shen.
hmm
Longtime St. Louis Blue. A favorite of mine. I like watching him play. He plays physical. He plays hard. He plays Blues hockey.
hmm
But you just want to see him um, clean up some of those things around the margins, and also maybe was standing out with a little bit of a worse roster talent around him. And then,
yeah,
like real quick on the other guys, I mean, Kevin Hayes. I feel like we traded for a face-off specialist with Kevin Hayes,
sure,
but for some reason it was a face-off specialist with like a 3-year contract, which you could get those anywhere around the league.
yeah,
I don't know, not a move I would have made. But he was a fine player, I should say.
hmm
Again, Falcon Krug really did not pull their weight. Scandella kind of had a rough year, just no production, just 8 points in 65 games,
right,
and
right,
not even a huge plus defensively. So mostly what I'm when I'm referring to the old section of the roster, it's just a lack of production on large contracts, and I think that goes back to roster construction.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, and you look at any team that's having that has success, and by that I mean makes it to the playoffs and makes a run. You know, almost any team that's able to do that has that blend of veteran talent and the youth, right? And we're starting to see some more of that youth coming onto the Blues this year, and hopefully moving forward in these next couple of years as well. And it would be great to see moving forward the veterans back it up.
And that's why I think
Totally.
it's actually set up really well, is
Hmm.
because with a lot of these ascending teams, it's the youth leading the way and the veterans are supplementary. I think the
Sure.
Blues right now, or at least last season, maybe relied a little bit too much on the veterans to be something that they weren't. But I
Mm.
really like how we're set up going forward to kind of have guys slot better into their role.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Um, just to start to wrap up this what went wrong segment of the show, I think the last big one I want to talk about is just the lack of consistency from the Blues. You saw them sort of going toe to toe with all of these really good teams. Like the last game of the season, they played the Dallas Stars one of the best teams in the league. They're so deep and so good, and they were competitive the whole game and even into overtime. And I mean, and then they go and lose all three games against the San Jose Sharks, the worst team in the entire league. It's people have been talking about it a lot. It's not something that people don't know already, but just a lack of consistency when matching up with opponents. You see them able to go toe to toe, like I said, with the Stars and the Oilers and all these powerhouse teams, but then they just fall apart against the worst team. So you have to be able to play more consistently than that. Just the quality of opponent shouldn't really change the way that you're playing. I don't think. You have anything to add on that?
Not a ton. I because to me this is the most perplexing thing about the St. Louis Blues. I don't understand why they do this, but I feel like this has always been a thing since I've been a
Yeah.
Blues fan, and I don't understand it. Because yeah, I mean, one night you can blow out the Avalanche 8-2 and just a
Yeah.
thrashing, like
Yeah.
statement win that
Mm-hmm.
we're coming for a not just a wild card spot, but could contend for one of the three spots of the West, and then like a week later just get blown out in the same fashion. I mean, I think also it hurts too. It felt like the games we needed to win interdivision, we really struggled with. I know specifically, personally, the Nashville Predators are a team that
Mm-hmm.
I hate very much because it always feels like it's important games against them, and those are the games we tend to drop. Or it's a game against the San Jose Sharks to keep your
Yeah.
playoff chances alive, and you get
Mm-hmm.
shut out.
Yeah.
So nothing really to add. Just it's so frustrating, and I hope that it's a coaching thing. Maybe it's a player mix thing, and maybe those guys will get shipped off this offseason. We'll see. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally frustrating. I totally agree on that. And sort of the last thing we'll talk about is what went wrong, and as sort of a transition into what went right, I would say is the coaching. The and obviously we've got some news here, so we'll go ahead and start to talk about it a little bit, sort of in a more general sense. We're going to do a future episode, hopefully next week, something soon to start to break down the Blues move signing Drew Bannister as the head coach. So they removed the interim tag from his title, so now he's the head coach of the Blues for the next 2 seasons. But before that, we saw Craig Berube at the beginning of the season really struggle to get this team going, and under his coaching, they were really underperforming. And I would say that was a negative. I would say that's something that went wrong for sure, and it's something that they addressed in the earlier on in the season by firing him and replacing him with Drew Bannister as interim head coach. On the negative side of things, do you have anything that you want to talk about as far as Craig Berube's time here this season?
I think from what I saw, it was more so just a time was up thing for Craig Brewery, and we
Mm.
just needed a different voice. I personally have nothing against the coach who brought us a Stanley Cup, and I never
Hmm.
will. I don't imagine, unless something drastic happens, I'll ever have something negative to say about Berube. And I think he's going to
Yeah.
be a great coach for another team, frankly. But I
Hmm.
do think the Blues made the right move in moving on because I just don't think it was fitting anymore. His
Yeah.
like old school hockey style just wasn't fitting with our young players, maybe stunning their development a little bit and really relying on those veterans. And as soon as we move on to Drew Bannister, we see guys like Jake Neighbors take off.
Hmm.
I think it really mostly was just maybe the right guy, but wrong time, or just
Mm.
time had expired on Berube's clock as the Blues head coach.
Yeah, yeah, I think I'd agree there. I did want to bring up. I saw this on Twitter or X from Blues Muse. He talked about, or they mentioned that under Craig Berube, so from the beginning of the season until December 12th of 2023, they had a 14-16-1 record, which is a 77-point pace. They had an 8.4 power play percentage, the worst in the
It
league.
was so bad.
It was so bad. And then you had players sort of underperforming. A big one that comes to mind is Jordan Cairo. In 28
Yeah.
games, he only had 5 goals and 12 assists, 18 points. So I think just the stats alone speak for themselves when it comes to what was going wrong at the beginning of the season. Like you said, maybe Berube's time was up. Um, but enough about the negatives. Why don't we start to talk about some of these positives? And along the same line of coaching, like I said, we'll talk a little bit more about Drew Bannister in depth in our next episode. But I would say that a big positive of the season was his ability to sort of turn things around. So from December 12th, 2023 through the end of the season, this is still from at STL Blues Muse on Twitter. Um, Under Drew Bannister, the Blues had a 30-19-5 record. That's a 102-point pace. Their power play percentage increased to 22.8 percentage under Drew Bannister. Their penalty kill slightly improved from 78.5% to 78.7%. So not a huge improvement there. But then you saw, Jordan Kyrou, I think, is the best example of player performance changing. So under Drew Bannister, Jordan Kyrou in 54 games played had 26 goals and 24 assists. So 50 points. He really got it going under Drew Bannister. Um, and like I said, we'll talk more in depth about this next week. But do you have any general thoughts that you want to talk about as far as Drew Bannister being hired, or I guess just the interim tag being removed from his title? Drew Bannister signing that 2-year contract with the Blues. Anything you want to talk about there?
Yeah, I mean, very briefly, I'll say I think I like the move. Um, and I think the Blues know what they're doing with this
Mm-hmm.
move. So I think there's no reason to entirely doubt it. As far as like this season, I think his record certainly speaks for itself. It was only part of the season, but he came into a not great situation and really turned
Mm-hmm.
it around.
Yeah,
Um, and also him before being the AHL coach of the Springfield Thunderbirds, our essentially minor league affiliate, like he had a rapport with a lot of these young players, and under
totally.
him we really got to see some of those guys flourish. So he's a
Mm-hmm.
young coach. He knows, at least from what we've seen so far, he knows how to develop young guys, and I think that's really important for where the Blues are going forward. And
Totally.
so yeah, I'm happy with that, and having a watchable power play again was fun.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe not great still, but watchable. Totally. And yeah, I mean, just to wrap up that talk, like I said, we'll really dive into this later. But I think given where the roster is currently, and then where it's headed in the next year or two, I think sort of similar to you, I don't hate this move. Um, it's the timing of it is interesting. Uh, just I think people expected them to wait a little longer, or if Drew Bannister was going to be the guy, they would have done it sooner. So I think some people are confused, and maybe rightfully so. But I don't hate this move at all. Uh, Now let's start to talk about the other positives from the season. So to start out with, let's dive into some skater performances, and then I think we can just take turns, sort of talking about some of these players, and we'll do a general overview. We'll dive more into the season that some of these players had on future episodes, but just as a general positive for the season, some of these individual performances were definitely a highlight of the year. And I think the biggest one to talk about, and the first one to mention, is the team's MVP. I don't think there can be much of an argument, at least skater MVP.
Yeah,
Um,
right, right.
Robert Thomas. I think this year he really emerged as one of the best centers in the NHL. He started to perform like a legit 2-way player. I mean, he was great on both sides. He played like a really great. Um, he played really great on both sides of the puck, and I think personally, even though he's not a Selke finalist, I think he should get some votes. I think he probably will. He had 60 assists this year, which is just wild. He's making great plays. That's 15th overall in the whole league, and obviously leading the team. And then he led the team with 86 points, so 26 goals. What did you see from Robert Thomas this year that you liked? What do you think is most notable about his performance this year?
I mean, his emergence this year was just so fun because we all kind of knew it was there. And I
Mm-hmm.
won't say he wasn't um, I don't know. I don't think it was entirely unexpected. I think especially for Blues fans who've been
Yeah.
watching him.
Yeah.
Um, but I, to see it all come together and really on a national stage this year was just so fun.
Yeah.
And I personally, I think he is arguably the best passer in the game.
Hmm.
60 assists on this Blues team, I
Hmm.
think, is unbelievable because some of the guys ahead of him, going down the list, Connor McDavid, okay. Nikita Kucherov, also okay. They both had
Hmm.
100 assists,
Right.
and they're just all time players.
Sure.
But also on all-time teams. Connor McDavid has that
Hmm.
one German guy, and Nikita Kucherov has the super team of the past, 15, not that long, but you know what I'm saying.
Right.
Nathan
Right.
McKinnon. I actually do think Nathan McKinnon had a much better season than I would have previously given him credit for.
Hmm.
But like Artemi Panarin, New York Rangers won the President's Trophy. Cale
Yep.
McCarr playing with Nathan McKinnon.
Hmm.
All these guys, all of this to say for me is I think Robert Thomas is a number one center. There's no doubt about it. And he is pushing top 20 in the league and has shown no signs of slowing down. I mean, his defensive game is only improving.
Hmm.
I don't know if he'll ever win a Selkie in his career, but he could certainly end up being a finalist.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, just phenomenal. So fun to
Yeah.
watch.
Yeah, it was great to see all that from him. He also, just as a last note, won 876 faceoffs, and that's the third most. So you love to see that from him. All right, but enough about Robert Thomas. Alec, I want to give the listeners a chance to hear you talk about your true love on the St. Louis Blues. And for those of you that don't know, and I'm sure it's all of you because this is a brand new podcast, Alec loves Jake Neighbors. So tell me about Jake Neighbors this year.
My special boy. Jake Neighbors is I just love watching his game. To me, he has everything that I want in a Blues player, and is only 22.
Yeah.
Also,
Yeah.
like he could be. I mean, if we were getting this production, I don't know, this level of like what he's shown from Jordan Kyrou,
Hmm.
the sky would be the limit.
Oh yeah.
First of all, when you score 5 more goals than you have years of age, you have my attention, Jake Neighbors. Additionally, his back checking and just physicality on the play, despite being not the biggest guy, he's not exactly small, but
Hmm.
skates well, plays hard, plays fast. I mean, just so good. I feel like every night or every other night, I would be watching a play and just see him do something spectacular, or see a Blues player do something spectacular, and it would be Jake Neighbors every time.
Hmm.
He plays hard. The one thing I think, again, 22 by the way, so
Yep.
it's
Yeah.
okay to have some issues with this game.
Hmm.
I'd like to see him come along as a passer a little bit more. I mean, 11 assists on the year is really pretty poor.
Yeah.
But this team was not a team that scored a lot of goals in the first place. You could argue whether that's Jake Neighbors' fault or not. Um, and also, this team needs goal scorers. So I'm okay having Jake Neighbors be a goal scorer. This is one guy who can finish. And I think this is a guy that we can kind of design our offense around. I personally would like to see him get more playing time on our power play unit. If
Hmm.
not the first unit, then certainly the second, because he's going to win those battles down low. He's going to make a nice pass up to the blue line, and if he gets something, in the slot, he's going to rip it, or he's going to put his stick out and redirect it the right way. So
Yeah.
it's, to me, Neighbors. The reason I love Neighbors so much is because for so many other frustrating things going on, he feels like the key that has all of the right tools that this team needs. If we only had like 2 or 3 more of this type of player, I don't think we would have missed out on the playoffs. But having one Jake Neighbors is enough for me, and I just cannot. I think the sky is the limit for this kid. 22 years old, and he's just one of the young potential stars in this league. Love
Yeah.
watching him.
Yeah, absolutely. And he got off to such a strong start, which was so fun to watch. And like you said, that finishing ability is wild. I was looking at some of these stats. He had an 18.6 shooting percentage, and that's 15th overall in the entire league. And you look at some of the names he's around. He's at tied with Zach Hyman on the Oilers, 18.6. Austin Matthews had 18.7, and he's the leading goal scorer. And then going up the list, Seth Jarvis on the Canes, 18.8. Leon Draisaitl, 18.9. So he's around some really
Yeah,
talented players, and even though like you said, maybe his game hasn't fully developed, that finishing ability and that goal scoring ability is legit.
yeah,
Really excited to see what he can do moving forward. The I think the last one that we'll sort of get in depth on and sort of in terms of a skater performance is Jordan Kyrou. And I think you could argue whether or not he was a highlight, but I'll say this for Kyrou: he stayed healthy and he played all 82, and you love to see that from
yeah,
your young players.
totally.
He also led the team in goals. He had 31 goals, 36 assists, so 67 points. And I think we're still waiting to see him really take advantage of his full potential. But like I said, he's still pretty young, and I think that's still a possibility. Obviously, he's on a big contract now, and um, I think that people have the right to be a little disappointed maybe with this season, but the fact that he stayed healthy and really bounced back under going through a change in the head coach and really bouncing back from his poor start, I think is a net positive on the season for Jordan Kyrou. Do you want to add anything to Kyrou's
Yeah,
performance?
I do have a little bit on that. I
Yeah.
do think, just echoing, first of all, the fact that he played the full 82 is so huge. First time he's done that, and
Hmm.
really needed to see that out of him because I would have
Yeah.
had a lot more questions otherwise. Um, I think the other thing too is the difference to me with Kyrou this year is that this year he played up to his contract,
Hmm.
whereas like Robert Thomas is actually kind of getting underpaid now because he's just that good.
Yeah.
But Kyrou, even if he doesn't, because we've all seen the flashes where he just does that insane when he wants to. His handling, his mitts can just be so smooth and
Yeah.
get around the best in the league. But the problem is that has only in the past worked like one out of every three times. Additionally, being a young guy, generally the best of his like playing around the competition at a younger age before he made it to the NHL, he probably had to not had to, but he probably relied on that because he was just better than everyone and he could just do that. Now, when he got to the NHL, not the same. And I think we're starting to see some of that get coached out of his game. I think he really turned it around for me this year. I'm no longer have any doubts in Jordan Kyrou, even if he doesn't fully become this elite playmaking winger. And this is who he is as a player. I'm actually okay with around 70 points a year. That's almost point per game.
Yeah.
Leading the team on goals. He's got a wicked wrister,
Hmm.
and that can be a really productive player. Um, so also, I think, especially in his case, last thing I'll say here, I think he does get a lot more flack for everything he does just because he's such a
Totally.
flashy player. And generally
Yeah.
in sports, that doesn't go over well. You have to be either really good or people just won't like your game.
Hmm.
And I mean, yeah, there was to me a really special moment of this season.
Yeah.
Was that one night when just booed off the ice, had a really
Yeah.
poor game,
Hmm.
and kind of he broke down a little bit in his post game, and then next day comes out and just lights it up, standing ovation, the whole deal.
Yeah.
Reminds me why I love sports, honestly. But so
Totally.
having that support, I think from the fan base, I think people are now more on his side after that, and I
Hmm.
think also having the support of Drew Bannister, who is going to let Kyrou be more his own player versus Berube's sort of my way or the highway mentality,
Mm.
which doesn't work for a guy like Kyrou. I think we could really see him open up. So I'm excited
Yeah.
for Jordan Kyrou next year.
Yeah, totally. I mean, just sorry, excuse me. Like we've been saying, the fact that he stayed healthy the whole season
Totally.
and bounced back from pressure and difficult situations. That was huge to see. Um, some other skater performances, we saw Colton Parayko, like you said, lead the league in block shots, 218. So that was cool to see. Buchnevich did pretty well. He had a couple hat tricks this year. Um,
No one was more
Brand,
upset about it than him, though.
I know, I know.
What was that?
Um, I'm not sure. I still don't know. Um, And then we saw Brandon Saad had an 18.1 shooting percentage. That's 20th overall. So he was pretty efficient um, in that sense. And he also had 7 game-winning goals, which is tied for 15th overall. So that's pretty cool to see. Let's move
Good
on
on
to
special
another.
teams too.
Yeah, totally, definitely. Let's move on to another huge highlight for the season, which was the goalie tandem. I don't think that you can really argue that this tandem wasn't elite. I mean, they were amazing. So Jordan Bennington and Joel Hofer combined for a 913 save percentage. They actually each individually had a 913 save percentage. I think when you break it down into some of those further decimal points, Joel Hofer's was a little bit higher. So you see his save percentage good for ninth overall in the league, which was awesome to see. But Jordan Bennington put the team on his back so often this year. He played 57 games of the 82 with 28 wins. That's 10th most. Um, and he made 1,630 saves, and that's fourth most in the entire league. And like we were mentioning earlier, a big reason that he had to perform so well was because the defense was so poor. And he did give up 156 goals, which is the sixth most in the league. But when you're getting the fourth most shots put up against you in the league, some of them are going to go through, no matter how good the goalie is. You know, the more shots are getting put up against you, the more goals are going to go in. So, but otherwise, I mean, as a whole, his season was amazing. Joe Hofer did great too. Alec, what do you want to talk about when it comes to the goalie tandem and how they performed this year?
Yeah, I really liked how you put it. Nothing short of elite.
Mm-hmm.
It's so refreshing to have that. Um, I mean, just unbelievable. On any given night, Bennington can stand on his head and just be a brick wall. For some
Mm-hmm.
reason, he just can't seem to ever get the shutout done. There's always like a late third period goal that spoils the shutty for him. But either
Yeah.
way, never going to be upset with a one goal against performance. Quick with the leather, really plays hard with his stick, which is usually a bad thing. But the way he does it, it works.
Yeah.
And the other thing that's part of I think relevant to Bennington's discussion, maybe a topic we can go into another time, is his perception as a like feisty, fiery, but also like whiny crybaby. I don't think is totally fair. We
Yeah.
see goalies just do this all the time, all over the league, but Bennington gets out for it because it happened on the national stage in the playoffs once.
Yeah.
Like there are all time lowlights of like Hall of Fame goalies doing this. That's just part of being a goalie and you know on a given night letting in so many goals when you know it's your fault. Yeah, that can feel horrible. The other thing too, as a St. Louis fan, I kind of like having a little fire behind in the net. Like
Yeah.
I I like when he gets fired up. He makes a
Yeah.
big save and he know it, and he'll talk smack and he's not afraid to do it. It's really fun to see. I mean, going into some of the stats is just these. Yeah, Hofer, and I guess I didn't touch on Hofer too, but really came along as a backup. Didn't I
Oh yeah.
honestly did not see this coming, but
Mm-hmm.
that's mostly because with goalies for me, especially prospect goalies, I have to see them play, and I hadn't. I believe this was his first year playing, starting in
Mm-hmm.
the NHL. Um, but yeah, leading in statistical categories, expected statistical categories. Looking real quickly right now at Money Pucks goalies, goal saved above expected, excuse me,
Mm-hmm.
leaderboard. Binnington was fifth on the list, just behind Jeremy Swayman, and also Stolars is third, which technically he only played 27 games, so
Yeah.
arguably shouldn't be qualified. So Binnington functionally is fourth and close behind fourth.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and Hofer is 17th with a very, very respectable mark for a backup, 10 goals saved above expected. That
Yeah.
is better than a lot of starters on this list. Also, in expected goals against, Hofer actually beats out Bennington. That could be a smaller sample size, but either way, I mean, just the goaltending, this is something you can build around now. I feel like a big problem last year was our team didn't have an identity. Now I feel like we can start to form an identity of young skaters and of this goalie tandem, especially
Mm-hmm.
with what we've potentially got coming too. I truly think that we're starting to see the core of a very scary team form.
I totally agree with that. And once they can start to shore up the defense and sort of start to limit, how many shots are getting through, I think we'll see a big step forward for the whole team. I couldn't agree more. Another highlight for this year, I think, is the shorthanded scoring. Despite the really poor penalty kill, they were able to score 11 shorthanded goals, which is sixth overall in the whole league. And I think what it really boils down to is their ability to steal the puck. They were first overall in the league with 723 takeaways. So while as a unit the penalty kill wasn't great as a whole in terms of um, uh, you know limiting goals, they were able to get the puck back and be pretty dangerous with it.
Yeah.
Um, and then to close up this segment, the young players and prospects, we've touched on them a little bit already. You saw Zachary Bolduc eventually. Once he got going, he played like a great forward. You mentioned Matthew Kessel earlier. I would add Tyler Tucker to that list. They both played great defense, and hopefully they can continue moving forward over these next couple of years. Anything else you want to touch on in terms of what went right before we move on?
Just on those young guys, Bolduc has such a wicked shot.
Oh yeah,
His like slap shot, it just sounds different. There isn't a statistic for that, but I'm sure he's got that dog in him.
oh yeah,
And I mean, I liked what I saw from Tucker and Kessel. Young defensemen are always going to be hard to evaluate. It's kind of like pitchers in baseball or like
hmm,
linebackers in football. You really won't know until a couple years in, unless they're just like
sure,
studs.
right.
Um, so yeah, I really like how this team is set up going forward. It was a frustrating season to watch at times, but I think it really left me at least, with a good impression feeling about the St. Louis Blues.
Yeah, I would agree for sure. All right, let's take a break from talking about the Blues and let's move on to what a lot of hockey fans are thinking about and talking about right now, and that is the 2024 Stanley Cup Playoffs. So I saw that you posted on Twitter, Alec, how much you loved the first round. Any general notes? Anything you want to talk about from round one of the Stanley Cup Playoffs this year?
Really, I think outside of the Metro, which was just a wash with two
Hmm.
teams that maybe should not have been in the playoffs, but that'll happen. I've enjoyed every matchup so much.
Yeah,
Battle for Florida has been a classic in the past 3 or so years, and
for
I
sure.
really like the Panthers' chances this year. They may or may not have been my pick. I mean, Boston, Toronto, Boston winning in 7 in the first round. How, like, that's just, it's every year, but it's just so classic.
I know.
Um, I like what's going on in the West, and especially in the Central too. Kind of wish the Jets didn't roll over as much as they did.
I
They
know. I
were
know.
so dominant in the regular season and really matched up well into Colorado, and I think they're
Hmm.
actually the team to beat Colorado. And now that Colorado is still in it, I think the West is going to have a hard time dealing with the Avalanche. Don't count them out for sure. But I mean, the Golden Knights are such a good playoff team. You can't ever count them out. The Dallas
Hmm.
Stars are one of the young, really talented teams. Really tough team to play in the Central.
Yeah.
Um, and even in the Pacific, watching just aesthetically pleasing hockey all around. So
Yeah.
I maybe it is just we're not in it, so I get to see more of it. But even then,
Hmm.
usually I try and watch a lot of matchups. The
Sure.
brand of hockey I feel like is just so crisp and exciting. It's energetic and not so formulaic.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's super exciting, and we saw some great series. I think the highlights were Dallas Vegas going 7, like you said, Boston Toronto going 7. That was a crazy series, and then Vancouver Nashville. That was like a really gritty series. It felt like
Yeah,
and very well
absolutely.
fought on both sides. But we're in round two now, and as we're recording this right now on May 8th, Colorado leads Dallas 1-0. It went to overtime last night, and Colorado pulled off the comeback. Vancouver is facing off against Edmonton. Game one's tonight. Boston leads Florida 1-0 in a surprising fashion. They beat them, I believe, 5-1 in game one. And then the New York Rangers lead Carolina 2-0. And I want to start there because I think that I guess that record or 2 games to 0 doesn't feel like it shows how close the series has been so far. Um, I think that Carolina is fighting, every possession and every period, and I think that the series as a whole is a lot closer than that 2 games to none mark would suggest, and I think we'll see a comeback there. Anything you want to talk about from round two so far?
Yeah, I really agree. I'm very surprised the Rangers got out to a quick start. I think this could very easily um, go back and we could see a 2-2 series split in the coming towards this weekend. Um, so that's been the most surprising for me.
Hmm.
Um, I do think, while I know Dallas is a lot of people's pick, I kind of already touched on this, but just Colorado in the playoffs, they're a wagon. I'm never going to count them out.
Yeah.
And I think that should be really fun hockey to tune into, seeing the stars shine all over the ice.
Hmm.
Um, as much as I hate to admit it, Jake Ottinger is one of my favorite goalies in the league.
Oh no.
Um, but yeah, I really all over. The only surprising one to me is the Rangers taking the first two, because yeah, they
Hmm.
were both super close games.
Yeah.
Um, Carolina has just always had kind of a finishing problem. They've typically been more of that formulaic. We're gonna play the
Hmm.
most restrictive defense, and Sebastian Aho will score one goal and we'll
Yeah.
win.
Yeah.
But now I think this is their best shot, and it feels like they've gone all in more so than ever. I think this kind of has to be Carolina's year.
Hmm.
So I would like to. I'm keeping my eyes on that matchup.
For sure. I think we should do our Stanley Cup picks. Not to spring it on you or anything, but so I'll go first, so you have some time to plan out what you want to say. But I think we should pick our teams out of the West and the East, and then our winner. So I'll go first. I think it's going to be the Canes over the Oilers in 6. That's going to be my pick. Another
Ooh.
a 2006 rematch. But like you said, I think this has to be the Canes' year. Um, and it's not looking super great right now, given the series against the Rangers being down 2 games. But I think they come back. And then looking in the West, I think I like Edmonton's chances. They're pretty fortunate that they don't have to face Colorado or Dallas right now. Maybe they'll get a quicker series win against the Canucks. But you look at Dallas's path to the Cup, and it's a tough one, going from Vegas to Colorado to the winner of Edmonton, Vancouver, and then facing whatever powerhouse comes out of the East. That's going to be a tough run for them. And so I think it'll also be tough for Colorado to beat Dallas. So whichever team comes out of that one, I think is going to be tired. And I think matching up with Edmonton's super efficient offense is going to be tough. So I'm going to take Carolina over the Oilers in 6 games for the Stanley Cup. And as you know, I'm a Canes enjoyer, so I might be a little biased there, but that's my pick. What about you, Alec?
Yeah. I think personally, this is going to be a Central Division on Atlantic Division Stanley Cup.
Hmm.
I really I'll start in the East because I think Florida is the best team right now. I think they were the best team in the regular season, and I think they're still the best team. Um, Played a little cold last night, but I have no doubt they'll pick it back up again. Just up and down. They're all four lines. They've got depth scoring. They've got top end talent. They've got solid defense, especially from their forwards. They've got really good defensive forwards and a really good goalie tandem too.
Mm-hmm.
I think they've got a really tough matchup against Boston, but I think Florida can pull it out, and I don't see them having a problem moving on to the Cup final from there. From the West, I'm gonna stick with my preseason prediction, or like coming into the playoffs,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm gonna go with Dallas. But I really think this matchup is really like maybe 55-45, maybe even
Mm.
50-50. Um, and going down 1-0 is not easy.
Yeah.
Um, it's just, for me, there's less question marks with Dallas, and more so will they execute,
Mm-hmm.
versus for Colorado, it's like Nathan McKinnon can only be the best player on the ice. Or sorry, let me reword this. Nathan MacKinnon can only like look like Superman so many games in a playoffs, and
Right,
maybe
right,
he
right.
does it. He
Hmm.
definitely has the talent to do it. But I think a more likely outcome, because their depth is really underratedly bad. Also, their goaltending is really, really bad.
Hmm.
But their depth was great, but their goaltending was terrible when they won the cup. I
Yeah.
mean, look at what happened to Grubauer as soon as he wasn't playing behind Cale Makar in an elite
Hmm.
defense.
Hmm.
And I say the same thing about Georgiev. I don't think he was that good before. I believe in Washington. And I don't think he's that good now. I think if they need a game to come down to goaltending, it's more so will the stars wake up? I think Robertson's been a little quiet.
Yeah.
Um, so, but I am going to take the Stars. And I think for my final, I will take the Florida Panthers over the Stars. I'll say 6 games, could easily go 7,
Hmm.
but I feel like the Panthers just have more fight. They look like they play hungrier. The Stars are mostly relying on their talent, but I don't think have their young core, as young as it is. I don't think they quite have the playoff experience required to take them over the top, but that could very easily blow up in my face and they could win the cup this year. I think they're totally talented enough to do that. But I'm going to
Yeah.
take the Panthers in 6 over the Stars.
Yeah, that matchup sounds really fun. I was sort of on the fence between Edmonton and Dallas, making it out of the West, but I think that matchup sounds fun, like a battle of the South kind of thing. Whether it's Dallas, Florida, or Dallas, Carolina, or whatever, we'll see. Um, and
Will
last,
Canada ever win a Stanley Cup?
will they do it? There's only
In
there's
20.
only two teams left, and they're playing each other. So, um, yeah.
Yeah.
So don't like their chances. And then lastly, I mean, obviously the Blues made it close. Coming into the end of the season, they were almost in a playoff spot, and I think um, they would have had to take Vegas's spot playing against the Stars in the first round. Do you think the Blues could have, um, you know, how do you think the Blues would have fared in the playoffs this year had they made it?
Yeah. So Um, if I'm being honest with myself, I think it was probably a first round exit.
Hmm.
I don't know that team had the depth to even win a series, let alone make a run. The defense was just atrocious, and we were getting no production from the blue line offensively.
Yeah.
Um, that being said, I will always, always take playoff Bennington in a chance. I swear that man has just another gear. I mean, you want to talk about fired up?
Oh
Put
yeah.
him in like under the lights, and he will show up.
Yeah.
So realistically, I think it probably would have been a first round exit, and I would have been very okay with that, even making the playoffs.
Hmm.
I think I would have made me very happy. But something about Jordan Bennington when it gets to May hockey, he just it's a different animal.
Yeah, yeah, he really is, and I think I'd agree. Just given how the Blues are currently constructed, I just don't see them being competitive with the likes of Dallas or, um, you know, a lot of teams that were in the playoffs this year. This is a really talented bunch of teams, and I think we're still a year, maybe two, away from seeing the Blues competing on that same level. To wrap up, let's dive into our first cleverly named segment that'll be a recurring segment, and we're gonna call it news and notes. So that's a play on our title, obviously note news. So for this segment, we'll just sort of break down some of the latest news that's been going on with the Blues specifically. So for news and notes on the first episode of Note News. Um, the Blues yesterday got the 16th overall pick in this year's draft. Um, so that draft is in June. So interested to see what they're going to do. Um, any quick notes on that draft pick that you wanna mention?
Um, I don't think so.
Yeah. Um, let's see what else. So the Blues signed a few Swedish players to entry level contracts. We've been seeing them lately really dive into this pool of Swedish prospects with Alex Steen in the hockey operations office. So those names are forward Marcus Silvegaard. He was signed to a 1-year entry level contract. Defenseman Samuel Johansson to a 2-year entry level contract, and forward Simon Robertson to a 3-year entry-level contract. These guys are all pretty young. Silvergaard's 24. He played 51 games in the Swedish Hockey League, the SHL, this past season. He led his team with 41 points and scored 23 goals, which was second in the league. Johansson's 23. He also played for the SHL. He played pretty well for his team. He was second with 11 goals and 27 points on his team. And then Robertson was actually drafted by the Blues back in 2021, and he's been playing in the Swedish Hockey League since then. Anything you want to mention about these guys? Pretty minor deals here.
Yeah, for the most part, I think it is funny bringing in Alex Steen and then having,
Mm-hmm.
only Swedish guys sign.
Yeah.
The one thing I will say is the SHL generally, this can change year to year, but is generally a very high level of competition.
Mm-hmm.
One of the more difficult, non NHL leagues. So I think it's promising. But I will keep my ears and eyes tuned to them coming forward, and
Yeah.
kind of no big expectations in truth.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, we'll see what happens with those. Um, Moving forward, Doug Armstrong, the Blues GM, has basically said that it sounds like he wants to extend Pavel Buchnevich, and he's got 1 year left on his contract. Buchnevich has mentioned in the past that he's enjoyed his time in St. Louis. It seems like he's open to an extension. What's your take on a possible extension for Buchnevich?
I've gone back and forth on this one a lot. And I think the biggest thing for me is his age. So
Hmm.
Buchnevich is 28, and he turns 29. Sorry, he just turned 29. Excuse me.
Okay.
So he's not an old player yet, getting up
Hmm.
there. And so the issue for me is I would love to extend Buchnevich. I would love to do it for like 4 or 5 years. I
Hmm.
think, and that's like maybe that, and maybe not even that much.
Hmm.
Um, for him, he's probably realistically only looking for one more big contract, and entering. So he would be entering a free agent pool as a age 30-year-old, still productive winger. He could get a big deal from a contender looking to go all in. Is this their one move? I The thing is, I don't think the way it plays out in my head, I don't think it makes sense for Buchnevich to sign here, or at least I don't think it makes sense for Armstrong to do so with what he probably is looking for. If he
Hmm.
gets a shorter term, 3 to 5 year contract, again, 5 is really pushing it.
Right.
I'm all for that. Around an AAV of what Kyrou and Thomas are getting, I think that's fine. I think he's
Hmm.
he's earned that. So I would just be careful. First of all, I would in no circumstances put any type of no move, no trade clause.
Yeah.
Just stay away from those,
Hmm.
at this point, especially because for a player of his caliber, if things do go wrong, he can be a really valuable trade piece.
Yeah.
Um, it just has to be the right deal.
Yeah, I'd agree there. We've seen so many of these long-term contracts really come back to bite them with all those, no trade clauses, like you were saying. So I think I'd be open to a contract on the shorter side as well. And then Army has also said that he hasn't ruled out Dalibor Dvorsky making the Blues roster for the 2024-25 season. It seems like Dvorsky thinks he's going to make the team. He had a great season in the Ontario Hockey League. He scored 45 goals, finished fourth in the league in points per game with 1.69 points per game. From what I've read and what I've seen, it seems to me like Armstrong is pretty hesitant to bring Dvorsky to St. Louis. I think Dvorsky is passionate about making it and excited at the prospect of it. But I kind of doubt, based on the things Armstrong has said, that he's going to make it next year. But it seems like Armstrong hasn't necessarily ruled it out. I just, given what he said, I don't know how likely it is. What do you think the odds are of him making the team, and how successful do you think he'd be, in the NHL next season if he does?
I think it's pretty unlikely, and I think it's probably the right move to give him another year. So he's 18 now. He'll turn 19 in a month. So he'll be playing out his age 19 season, and he was the 10th overall prospect, or 10th overall pick, and by the way, should not have been. He was a top 7 player easily in
Hmm.
that draft. Um, Also, I will mention he's my favorite Blues prospect that I think maybe we've ever had.
Ooh,
Um,
okay.
I really love his game, and I really, really like what he can be.
Hmm.
as sort of a Robin to Thomas's Batman, or maybe even like a, I don't know, some other superhero duo. Um, but I do think honestly, um, it would really he would have to just tear it up. I mean, like approaching 2 points per game for me to even consider calling him up at
Yeah.
19. I
Yeah.
say no reason to rush it. Um, and especially with Bannister on that 2-year contract, I think getting Dvorsky in towards the end of Bannister's term could be helpful for him too. So like maybe down the stretch next year if you want to spark or something. But I would put it probably, if I honestly probably like 90% he doesn't get called up next year, and I think that's the right move.
Yeah. I'd agree there. And then to wrap up our news and notes segment, obviously the big one, which we already talked about a little bit, is Drew Bannister. He's the head coach now. And like we said, we're going to dive deeper into that on our next episode. So look out for that one. We're gonna be talking more about that and give y'all some of our takes on that. Um, I think that about does it for our first episode. What do you think, Alec? Anything else you want to add before we wrap things up?
No, that's it. Let's go Blues.
Yeah, let's go Blues, baby. So before we finish up, I think it'd be good to explain to our listeners sort of a bit about what to expect from us at Note News. Um, to start out with, we're going to do recordings like this and release them later on. And then eventually, once we get the swing of things, get the hang of things, we're going to transition to live streams. And to start out with, we're probably going to do episodes once a week, every other week. Stick with sort of a um, uh, more interrupted schedule like that, as opposed to more frequent. Um, and then we can also do, emergency pods as needed if there's a big signing or a trade or something like that. We're probably gonna try to stick to that once a week or every other week schedule until the season begins, and then we'll start to ramp up to weekly or maybe even twice a week. Um, and I also want to say thanks to the guys at Deal in the Cards. Shout out to them. If you love St. Louis content and for some reason are listening to Note News and not Deal in the Cards as well, then you really ought to go listen. They put out some great content about the Cardinals, and they're the ones that put this whole thing together and got us going here, got us set up. So really appreciative of Josh, Sandy, and Andrew over there. So shout out to them. Give them a follow. Deal in the Cards. And then if you want to follow us, we're on Instagram and Twitter at Note News Pod. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. And if you like the show, you can give us a 5-star rating wherever you get your podcasts. So Spotify or Apple, wherever it may be. Um, give us that 5-star rating. It'll really help out as we get things going. Alec, how do you feel? Episode 1. How do you feel? Note News.
Great. Excited to keep talking hockey. A lot of good stuff coming up. Looking forward to it.
Absolutely. All right. Well, then for Alec and myself, let's go Blues. Thanks for listening to episode 1 of the Note News podcast.
Let's go Blues.